I think it's we can start. Gabriel, ready? Okay. So welcome everybody. I see that the participants are joining now, so we wait really a few seconds. So the number is increasing. So we wait for a few seconds. Anyway, 50, 52, 57, 60, 61. Yes, number is increasing. 65. Yes. We wait just a few seconds. Everybody entering in the room. 70. 75. Okay. I think we can start. No, the number is going there, but we can start, I think. Just a moment. Okay. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar and webinar on EU Islands economy and COVID-19, actual situation and the requests from islands, EU plans for the recovery after crisis. I have to thank a lot, of course, the partnership with Insulair, the support from CPMR Islands Commission, and also of course the Global Island Partnership, and recently we received the support by other organizations like ACIN, the Institute of Technology of Canary Islands, etc., and others are supporting us. I welcome the speakers of today, and in particular I'd like to go very quickly the agenda, and we have the honor to have two key speakers. So it's going very fast. One moment. So we have yes, yes. So we have the honor to have with us Mr. Tonino Piccola, Chair of SEARICA, Seas, Rivers, Islands and Coastal Areas, that will talk about the importance of the cohesion policy in the recovery plan for islands, what measures the Commission adopted via cohesion policy to address impacts of the crisis now, and also to outline the tools available to support specific territories in the next programs. This is the title of Mr. Normundus Poppens, Deputy Director General of the DG Regio of the European Commission. And then we'll follow the presentation of the Chairman of Insulair, the network of insular chambers of commerce and industry of EU, Mr. Joseph Borg. We will talk about the actual situation and priorities of islands economies. And Giuseppe Sciacca, the Executive Secretary of the CPMR Island Commission, will talk about the peculiarity of islands and the need of special financial programs. Mr. George Kremlis, Honorary Director of the European Commission in charge and on behalf of DG Environment of Circular Economy and Islands, advisor to the Greek Prime Minister on Energy, Climate, Environment and Circular Economy, Honorary President of the International Circular Economy Institute of the European Public Law Organization, EPLO, will talk about insularity in circular economy in the light of COVID-19 and climate change. And Mr. Willy Brodus Duiters, head of the unit of the DG Regio for Greece and Cyprus from the European Commission, will talk about the EU programs for the recovery of the island's economy after the pandemic. After the speeches, there will be a roundtable, a debate, and then a Q&A session. And I have to say to the participants that questions can be raised during the webinar, and so speakers can see also questions they can manage to answer immediately after the speeches. And if there are questions that cannot be answered today, will be answered in a second step. So this is very, very important. So I'd like to make a very short introduction, as we have launched a survey to the island's economy, and the survey is still open and will close on the 4th of June, but because on the 5th of June we'll have a webinar, global webinar on tourism. But I did extract some highlights from the answers we did receive already. And I have to say that one important question was, do you think that a specific aid package for island businesses should be formulated? And of course, the majority said yes, almost 90%. Because islands are living a different situation and more dramatic than in the mainland, because they live only of tourism. And you see some comments I hear, of course, so special support should be given. Sorry, my presentation. So special support should be given to the islands who are living only of tourism. And only depending on tourism. There is a very important comment saying that we are going directly to the next summer, so we will not I don't know if the screen is shared or not, and you see the screen. Do you see my screen? Hello? Yes. Sorry, maybe there was the screen was missing. Maybe you should see the screen now. So let me come back on the presentation. And so, as I was stating, of course, there is another important comment that this is an opportunity for all of us to see what the European Union can do for us. Let's say it's a very important message to the, of course, to the EU speakers. And there is another question: after the experience of the pandemic, how much do you consider to make business through online tools and digital services? And of course, most of the business can go digital. Even tourism can be promoted digitally, and the internal process can be digitally. But of course, anyway, for the of course, tourism can be activated when will be possible to travel. But there are important messages in this chart. Do you think that the transition to sustainability of your island can be strategic for the relaunch of your business? And the majority has said yes, sustainability is very important. And there is, of course, you can see some comments where air purification and hygiene will be a driver after COVID. It can have a very, very positive effect on quality tourism, but there is some, let's say, concern about how the government can really support the environmental policies. And then, of course, there is a lot of interest in remote places now. As much more than before, islands can be seen as a safer place where to, of course, spend holidays. And one last question is the top of the activities due to coronavirus has reduced the CO2 emissions and made the sea cleaner everywhere. Based on this experience, after this time, do you think that people, business, and governments should operate more in favor of health and environment? And of course, you see that the yes was very, very radical. Yes, so with these messages, anyway, from the Islands Economy, Islands Entrepreneur Survey, anyway, focus on sustainability and digitalization, I'd like to conclude my introduction and give the floor to the first speaker, Mr. Tonino Piccola, from Chair of SEARICA. Please, Mr. Piccola, the floor is yours. Please unmute your...
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, very well, Mr. Piccola, please.
Yeah, thank you. And dear distinguished host, speakers, viewers, I'm really happy to be here with you all. Today, I'm pleased to share some of my views on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on islands and the possible solutions to help islanders overcoming the consequences it has caused. First of all, show me and allow me to present CIRICA, European Parliament Intergroup on seas, rivers, islands, and coastal areas that I have the honor to chair and speak about here today. I feel thrilled to see CIRICA continuing to exist in this third consecutive mandate with the biggest number of members so far, 107 new members from 23 member states and 6 political groups. I like to say that if we just compare a number of members, we would be the third biggest political club in European Parliament and by far the biggest parliamentary committee. Our composition provides a great platform to stimulate debates with other EU institutions and all interested key stakeholders in the European Parliament on different subjects, but also to facilitate the coordination of members of the Parliament in our daily activities. Aside from myself as a president, board of CIRICA consists from 12 members of the Parliament covering different thematic aspects of maritime agenda. As some of you already know, during the last mandate, I was a vice president of CIRICA in charge of islands. In fact, I created this dimension of CIRICA for the first time, gathering members of parliament interested in islands and joining our efforts with CIRICA colleagues. After almost 6 years, some results of this work are visible. European Parliament adopted resolution on European Union islands, and some great new incentives such as clean energy for European Union islands were created and hopefully will become a permanent structure. I will speak more on that topic before the end of my speech. For now, I would like to say that these results and increased interest in islands is encouraging, but we cannot be satisfied until the famous Article 174 of Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union is respected. And there in our common constitution, it's written that, I'm quoting now, in order to promote its overall harmonious development, the Union shall develop and pursue its actions leading to the strengthening of its economic, social, and territorial cohesion. In particular, the Union shall aim at reducing disparities between the level of development of the various regions and backwardness of the least favored regions. End of the quote. Islands are singled out in this context and in this article for a good reason. As all of you know, there is no holistic European maritime strategy covering all of maritime issues. That is perhaps mostly visible now during the pandemic crisis. In this context, the objective of Syrica is to coordinate our actions and support the development of a strong maritime dimensions within European strategy and the main incentives proposed by European Commission. Ongoing pandemic crisis and economic consequences that are hard to fully predict will have tremendous impact on islands too. I've been in contact with islanders all across Europe, and all of them fear that some of the inhabitants, mostly small business owners, will return to mainland, being unable to generate sufficient resources to live there. Many of our islands are too dependent on unsustainable tourism. While the nature will profit from the crisis, a lack of resources generated from touristic activities that are main source of income for most of the islands will leave its tool. This is why Syrica adopted declaration on the impact of COVID-19 that we discussed with the Commissioner Sinkevicius last week. Entire maritime sector is being greatly impacted, from the fishing industry to strategic infrastructures such as ports, sea and inland waterways, and supply chains, waterborne transport, coastal and maritime tourism. Syrica reaffirms its mission to defend the maritime sector and islands in the crisis and post-crisis scenario. We welcome the measures adopted over the past few weeks to face COVID-19 crisis, as well as those recently proposed, which are also beneficial to the maritime sector. But there was no measure specifically targeted to needs of islands. Once again, islands are left to struggle within different sectorial programs and policies to struggle for bits and pieces of it. What we want European Union maritime policies to incorporate a strong territorial dimension. First step to help the recovery of islands is to concentrate European Union intervention in the key sectors that represent strategic assets for islands. As mentioned, this is already partially done. On top of it, I officially asked the European Commission to come up with a communication on impact of COVID-19 on islands. The main idea is that islanders could use that document as a base when asking to receive the share of all of assistance programs already adopted. It would also come as a good foundation to redirect the share of funding from future recovery plan to islands. While awaiting for the recovery plan to be presented tomorrow, I would like to remind you of some of the key demands European Parliament asked for in our resolution. We call for the massive recovery package to transform our economies and strengthen their resilience through the pooling of strategic investments to support SMEs. Also, to increase job opportunities and skills to mitigate impact of the crisis on workers, consumers, and families. We want it to be aligned with the Green Deal, but most importantly, we ask for it to ensure that the recovery strengthens territorial cohesion and competitiveness. It should address social and economic inequalities and the needs of those hit hardest by the crisis. In the times when public funding and private investments will be more limited, European Union funding will play even greater role, whereas cost of investments and market size of smaller islands is particularly not the profitable solution.
Mr.
Yes?
Piccola, sorry, yes, we got just 2 minutes left to end your speech.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One thing I wish to underline here is that while we are fighting for and support inclusion of islands in future programs such as Recovery Plan and Just Transition Fund, we need longer term permanent strategy for EU islands that would also help us to turn all these challenges into opportunity. When fighting for the islands agenda, we often witness similar response. It is impossible to create a special category for them or to tailor a policy that can fit all their needs. They are so diverse, etc. I think that diversity of islands is one of their best assets to make them the perfect showcase to implement vital policies such as this one on energy transition. I would like to conclude by reminding the successful initiative on clean energy for EU islands and the running secretariat are the very good example how European Union islands can be and are at the forefront of energy transition and decarbonization of economies. Who, if not islanders, are better to show how to turn natural disadvantages and often scarce resources into sustainable lifestyle. It's the essence of their existence on island. Even when natural resources are plenty, technology on how to use and extract them is missing. Let's continue with the good work. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Piccola, thank you. Your intervention has been very, very clear, and you mentioned a lot of very important words like territorial cohesions and islands as showcases anyway for the world, let's say. And you did mention anyway, give the floor also to the European Commission. And anyway, the second speaker now is Mr. Normunds Poppens, Deputy Director General of the GTI European Commission, that I'm sure will complement your speech and very important input. Thank you very much, and I'm sure there will be a lot of questions from audience for you. Please, Mr. Poppens, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you, and let me also say good afternoon to everybody who has managed to log on to this webinar. I'm really happy to participate. Ireland, basically all territory region, needs to say that we do believe that also these territories need and deserve special attention in our policies and our programs. Now, obviously, the crisis has hit us very hard.
Mr. Poppens, the quality is maybe of the line is. Would you like to try to turn off the video if that will be better?
Some say gurus of the world. I can try to connect with my equipment. Wait a second.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. We are doing everybody.
Is it better now?
Very normal. Yes, 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 Mr. Poppens.
Is it better now?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay, good. You see, we have solutions for everything. I look like a telephone operator, but I'm happy you can hear me much better. So the crisis has hit us all very hard. I mean, there's no doubt. Some people say it was predictable, but probably not. And this is the first time we experienced something like that on such a scale. Obviously, the restrictions on the mobility, on our way of life were necessary, and they were put in place by our governments and authorities in order to protect everybody, to deal with the health challenges for our population. So they were needed, and they show now the results, and hopefully we see that the health situation in the European Union and in the world improves. At the same time, obviously, we also know that they have and will continue to have a profound effect on our lives and our economies for probably a few years to come. I mean, they have had a major knockout effect on our small and medium-sized businesses and our job markets. And obviously the island regions, because I think even if somebody says it's not just tourism, it's true, but to a large extent, tourism and travel industry, and also the fact that you can reach islands only by certain means of transport, has a huge effect on island economies. And also I think people and businesses on islands in EU, but also worldwide, will feel this effect probably longer. And also this recovery phase will probably be more difficult to start. We recognize that, and this is why I think very optimistically looking at what's happening now in Europe, that the confinement is ending. We need to be realistic and together think how we best ensure that this return to recovery and normal economic and social life really takes place equally all around different regions inside the European Union and globally. And this is probably, and this is absolutely where our policy, cohesion policy and regional policy, becomes very, very important, because we are the ones who are probably together well placed to address those challenges in very particular situations, but also across Europe as such. And this is why to deal with this impact, I think it's a good time now to show the EU solidarity, to try to see what we can do from the cohesion policy. After all, it is a third of the EU budget. It is our key investment tool, and we have to make it useful and targeted for this particular situation. Just a few words as a Commission. I think we reacted very rapidly to this situation and very decisively, because we came immediately already in the end of March. We came up with the first package, sort of Corona response investment initiative, the CRI as we call it. And in the first go, we immediately looked at our funds, at our programs, and we saw that there are some amounts which can be used quickly for dealing with emergency situations. And this is why we quickly proposed, and they were adopted also, these changes which I referred to are linked to support to the working capital of small and medium-sized enterprises, by enlarging the scope of our policy objectives to make clear that the protective equipment for people can be bought from the funds, and also obviously not recovering pre-financing amounts, which we normally do every year, to make sure that the liquidity, which was starting to be a problem, is not really hitting our beneficiaries. Obviously, this was just the first package, and we knew that we will have to come up with something even more serious, because when we looked at the programs, we saw that there are about 53 to 55 billion euros, which were still not committed and basically not used under our programs of the shared management. So we engaged with member states and our managing authorities, be it at national, regional levels, but also with our stakeholders at different levels, to see what are the biggest obstacles to unblock this remaining funding under EU structural funds. And this is how we arrived at the CRI Plus package, which really proposed profound changes for the last years of managing our programs. We provided extremely huge flexibility, going up to 100% of co-financing rate, allowing flexibility between transfers of funds, and not just the ERDF and the social fund, but also the ERDF and cohesion fund, which was problem in many member states. We also saw that, pursuing thematic concentration, which is one of the key principles of our modernized policy, is not relevant at this point in time. So we actually tried to unblock all possible amounts that are still available in all possible ways, to make sure that we can target this investment to the real needs on the ground. As I said, to address this health situation, first of all, then to address SME problems, and also to address problems with unemployed people for the wage schemes. So all these aspects we were quickly trying to unblock. And obviously also the use of financial instruments, the administrative burden was reduced. We have accelerated procedure for those programs that need to be modified in order to benefit from these flexibilities. We have established internally the very fast procedure how to adopt these modifications very, very quickly. And we said this, we will continue working with everybody. Our units are constantly in contact with our managing authorities, which in many cases also represent islands, because if I look at the program setup, many regional programs are actually programs in particular island regions. In Greece, you will have Illebroad speaking later on, but we have French, Spanish, Portuguese islands, which have their own programs. So, and they're together in a dialogue, which really I think are very helpful.
Mr. Poppins, sorry, you got 2 minutes left. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
I cannot be that short, you know me, but okay, I will try. So what I try to say is that these modifications make sense and they should be used. And this is a time to use them. This is time to work together. We are in daily contact with managing authorities, be it at national or regional levels. And your inputs and your dialogue with these authorities and with us is extremely important, because we have to figure out what is the best way to use these flexibilities and this additional and this funding which remains for current period. There are decisions that need to be taken at the member state level, but we will treat them very rapidly, and we are going to work upstream with everybody who wants to modify the program, who wants to launch more specific calls to fight COVID crisis, support SMEs, tourism, and everything. Not just that, the Commission has published recommendations how to unblock tourism industry, how to open internal borders. I hope this all fits in. Tomorrow there will be a new recovery package where I'm sure the cohesion policy will play and continue playing an important part. At the same time, we should not forget the medium and long-term sustainability and the necessity to work on the prospect of our economy becoming more sustainable, which is obviously Green Deal, where we are also starting now to program Just Transition Fund, all the Just mechanism. But also, obviously, there are specific tools under the new regulatory framework, which will stay in place. We will see if we need adjustments, and particularly, of course, a new policy objective 5, Europe Closer to Citizens, is something where we would look at also our dialogue with managing authorities, member states and regions to make sure that this policy objective is also used to address the needs of specific territories, such as islands. As somebody said today, there is no one recipe fits all, be it islands, be it EU level, be it regional level, member state level. We need to fine-tune our investment under the structural funds, under cohesion policy, to make sure that they reach the right beneficiaries and that they have an effect. So on the one hand, short-term focus on fighting COVID crisis effects, tourism, SMEs, wage schemes, everything, health-related investment, not to lose the medium and long-term, which is Green Deal, which is sustainable transition, and long-term development, on which, again, we will work very hard this year to make sure that the next programming period can start as soon as possible. So I'm sure this will be part of also recovery at the EU level, but the dialogue between different levels of governance is key for us. Thank you. Your mic is muted now.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Poppins. Very broad overview of what the Commission is doing, and in the plan for the short term and long term. Simply, I'd like to underline that yes, the sustainability means also efficiency, a reduction of cost. As in the islands, there are a lot of inefficiency, and producing the energy cost even 3 times than producing the energy with the renewables and so on. So anyway, when in a time where money are very important, sustainability could be anyway a way of cutting costs anyway, which are very important. And so thank you, and I hope you stay as much as possible with us, Mr. Poppins, also for some questions and debate with other speakers. I'd like to give the floor to the voice to the islands companies, the islands entrepreneurs, and Mr. Joseph Borg, President of Insulaire, that represent the Chamber of Commerce of Europe will bring the voice of the industry in the islands. Mr. Borg, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Johnny. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is with pleasure that I address you today as President of Insulair, which is the Insular Chambers of Commerce and Industry of the European Union. I would like to thank Greening the Islands Foundation and especially you, Johnny, for enabling this valuable partnership with Insulair in order to be able to organize this webinar. Okay. Also, a word of thanks to CPMR for co-supporting this initiative. During these times, the crucial importance of digitalization has come to the fore. Through this webinar, digitalization is helping us bridging the divide due to the restrictions imposed on us because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as Insulair, we had the foresight of already seeing the importance and potential of digitalization when we organized the Insular Forum last October on the island region of Gozo, focusing on digitalization and how this can help address the difficulties faced by islands. Being also the president of the Gozo Business Chamber, I am based in Gozo, Malta, from where I am speaking. I now come to the actual topic we are discussing today. As indicated in the subject title of my intervention, I am first going to focus on the problems we faced and are now facing, and then I shall focus on what should be the priorities at this stage. In outlining the actual situation of island economies, I am going to draw on a 2012 opinion of the European Economic and Social Committee, as I believe that many of the problems outlined in this opinion paper are still actual and being faced by island economies today. In describing the relationship between tourism and islands, this opinion paper highlights how, I quote, many European islands have found tourism to be an essential factor for their survival of the local population, their identity, cultural traditions and values, and landscapes. It has generated economic growth, created more jobs, and brought considerable diversification to their economic foundations through tourism-related services. Island economies have, however, become too dependent on tourism. Diversification towards activities that are complementary to tourism is needed, facilitating the economic development of islands in the face of crisis. Very few things have changed since 2012. In my letter to Insulair members at the start of this COVID-19 crisis, I highlighted, I quote, I am aware of the grave difficulties we are currently facing. Island economies, more than others, are dependent on tourism, on certain sectors which have been deeply hit by the crisis, such as tourism. Island economies thrive on tourism. However, the future for this industry now looks bleak. The importance of tourism was also recognized by the European Commission in its latest communication on tourism and transport in 2020 and beyond. Tourism contributes 10% to the European gross domestic product, both directly and indirectly, with 563 million international arrivals and 30% of global receipts in 2018. This is the information which I can now skip. We're also speaking about the islands need services to be connected, such as ferries and airlinks, and with other essential services being offered on islands, these start to be called into question. The European Commission has shown itself prompt, as we have heard, to respond to this crisis through the temporary aid framework adopted in March 2020. Through the temporary state aid framework, member states can provide direct grants up to €800,000 or loans and guarantees on very favorable terms for large amounts. Grants can also be offered as compensation to businesses. A further €1 billion has been unlocked as a guarantee for the European Investment Fund. Also, the Coronavirus Response Investment Initiative has also allowed flexibility to member states to redirect cohesion financing. This has shown that a flexible approach has been adopted by the Commission in order to mitigate and contrast this crisis. We have seen our countries use these tools in order to mitigate the impact of this crisis on businesses. As islands, we are now calling for a more flexible but permanent approach to the state aid framework in order to consider the specific difficulties being faced by our territories. The current crisis shows that the state aid framework can be a flexible tool to counteract specific difficulties and situations. The European Commission needs to adopt a more flexible approach on state aid for islands, not only temporarily, but on a more permanent basis. This would really provide a valuable tool for the integration of European islands in Europe.
Mr. Borg, sorry, you just less than 2 minutes left, please. Thank you. Thanks.
Islands can be important contributors to the island economy, to the European economy, but this can never be attained if they are not given the necessary tools to be able to compete and progress on a level playing field. So this should be accompanied by whole rethinking of our island economies. Changes to state aid and other types of financing should be targeted towards assisting islands in diversifying their economy. These initiatives should help them move from the traditional short-sighted economic model basis solely on the returns from the tourism sectors to other sectors, which should help them in attaining a more sustainable rate of economic growth. As the temporary framework states, the green transition and the digital transformation will play a central and priority role in ensuring a successful recovery. So our proposals start with an economic model which focuses on making islands more sustainable. This should be in line with the Clean Energy for European Islands initiative that aim to support the energy transition of EU islands from 2020 to 2030. We need to consider net zero emissions on islands and the circular economic model for islands, which is restorative and regenerative by design. Secondly, the digital transformation of European islands. This was a subject of our forum last October. Digitalization can assist islands in bridging that long-sought gap in economic development with mainland territories. However, this cannot happen on its own. This model needs to be accompanied with an investment package, incentive package, and infrastructure in order to attract the right industries to islands. And lastly, this cannot move forward unless there is collaboration between islands. Islands need to collaborate together on many issues. Islands cannot fight on their own the difficult issues they are facing. As I reiterated in my concluding address during the Insular Forum, small islands grow stronger in unity. To conclude, let us therefore collaborate together, especially during this difficult situation. This webinar, which is being presented today in collaboration with the numerous partners that are participating, is already a step in the right direction. As Insular, we will continue to work so that the needs of islands are addressed at every level. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Borg. Thank you for, anyway, the partnership and support you are giving to Green the Islands in this initiative. And yes, you underlined properly the voice of the islands economy, really right in line with the result of survey. Sustainability and digitalization are key words. And I'd like to give the floor now to the executive director of CPMR Islands and Commission that will bring the voice of the islands government of Europe, Mr. Shaka. Please.
Thank you, Gianni. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well, please.
Thank you, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here, actually in the rain, but to have this opportunity to participate in this webinar with you and share some thoughts and information also concerning the socioeconomic impacts of this terrible crisis on islands. So I will start my presentation by sharing a couple of input concerning the CPMR, of course, for those people who do not know who we are, what we do. So the CPMR is a think tank, is a group of interest which brings together 150 regions at European level. CPMR stands for Conference of Peripheral Maritime Region of Europe. As you can see in this slide, we cover almost 99% of the EU coastal regions, and we have a very bottom-up structure because the CPMR is internally divided in 6 geographical commission and a general secretariat. Concerning the geographical commission, they cover the different EU basin, like for instance the Atlantic Arc Geographical Commission, the North Sea Geographical Commission, the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, the Inter-Mediterranean Commission, and last but not least, there is another geographical commission, a sort of interbasin geographical commission, bringing.
Can you make the screen bigger? Anyway, just a full presentation.
Sorry. Okay.
Thank you.
I think that now it could be better.
Yes.
Okay. So I was saying another geographical commission bringing together all the Highlands regional government that are member of the CPMR. And I have the honor to coordinate the technical activities of this geographical commission. As I said, all the Highlands regional government, regional local government from 11 countries, and so far we are 21 members. We have the 21 members from a different oceans at the EU and not only EU level. Of course, you can see in this slide we are member from the Ocean Indian and also the Atlantic Arc Ocean. Okay, so let's start with the content of this presentation. Today, it was impossible for me within 7 minutes to present all the different socioeconomic impacts for all the highlands that are member of the CPMR. So I tried to share with you just a couple of cases. And let's start with Mayotte, which is among the farthest islands member of the CPMR. I will share with you the result of a study made by the Mayotte Economic Observatory on 584 enterprises. And what the Mayotte Economic Observatory tried to do is to collect the first rough information concerning the socio-economic impacts. As you can see in the slide, these data are data that have been collected in April, by mid-April 2020. So almost 96% of the enterprises that have been contacted pointed out that they registered the impacts on turnover. They pointed out also that they registered height difficulties with the treasury. Again, 96% of the enterprises that have been contacted. Another data that I would like to share with you is that almost 83% of the enterprises that have been contacted asked for economic support, which is a very key data for us, and we have to bear in mind this data, of course. And another data that is important for us is something that already Gianni showed during his presentation. As the last one, almost 82% of the enterprise that have been contacted pointed out that they are deeply concerned about the future of their business. If we look at the breakdown of this data, we can see that in Mayotte, there is a very, very clear situation in terms of what are the sectors that have been most impacted by this crisis in April. And so we can see that hotels and restoration are the most impacted sectors. And this is also a very important input for us when it comes to discussion concerning the recovery plan, etc., etc. Moving from Mayotte and going to Spanish Highlands, this is a slide showing the data, always concerning April 2020, developed by CEPRED. Actually, it's a forecast. CEPRED is a Spanish research center, and in this slide you can see at the losses in terms of regional GDP that the Spanish region could register in coming months. And I would like to underline that and bring your attention on the fact that Balearic Islands and Canarias Islands are among the region that will register the highest losses in terms of a percentage of regional GDP. Again, this is an input that we have to bear in mind when it comes to discussion or debate about EU policies, recovery plan, etc., etc. Moving from this Spanish context to the context
Mr.
of...
Shaka, sorry, you got 2 minutes left. Thank you.
2 minutes left. Okay,
Yeah.
so I will give the floor to my colleague Charlotte Courant, and I will go very fast.
Okay, hello, I represent the Savoir-Faire des Îles du Ponant Association, which brings together professional and island communities. And we are carrying out a study to measure the consequences of this crisis on island businesses all over this year. So we know that island businesses, for the most part, balance out the year thanks to seasonal tourist traffic. So they need this seasonality to survive all year long. If the tourist frequentation is strongly limited this summer, for health reasons that we all understand, the majority of island companies will achieve at best 40% of their turnover. So this is far to be sufficient to cover their expenses and will not allow them to survive the winter and maintain a social bond there. So the challenge now is to maintain the fragile balance on the Ponant Islands, not this summer, but by April 2021. Ensuring the sustainability of island businesses is vital to keep permanent residents and jobs on island and keep essential services to meet health, social, economics, and training needs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Charlotte. Okay, I will try to go very fast. Let's move to another case, which is the case of Corsica. According to the last information that we got from INSEE, which is the Statistic National Institute in France, from this slide you can see that the Corsica will be probably among the region that will register the highest losses in terms of activities at the regional level. So again, this is something that we have to bear in mind. And if we look at the breakdown per sector, again, of course, the hotels and accommodation sector will be the most affected sector in the coming months. Always concerning Corsica, at the CPMR, we started to gather information concerning the socioeconomic impacts, but at the same time, we started to collect information concerning the activities and the reaction that the regional governments are implementing in order to cope with the impact of the COVID-19. So this slide is just to share with you very basic information concerning the initiative that Corsica region launched over the last 2 months. It's a plan of around 30 million euro with 3 main strands. One on solidarity in order to help the household in difficulties. The second strand in order to help business and of course to support the insular economy. And the last but not least strand is to reflect on how we can build on a new socio-economic model for the post-crisis period. I'm finishing. I will go very fast. This slide, you know better than me, is a sort of a summary of all the initiatives that the European Union developed so far and will develop. There are some reference to what Mr. Poppens already said, 67 billion of euro that the European Union already allocated in order to tackle the COVID-19 crisis. And also there are some reference to the next steps, this famous recovery plan, and also the reviewed MFFF that we'll discuss tomorrow. So just to say that, of course, money is a key issue. We need, in terms of islands, a strong support from the European Union in terms of the financial support, of course. But the most important is, last but not least, how we will use this money. And allow me to finish, to conclude my presentation by underlining the fact that we had a lot of discussion over the last weeks. Even Mr. Poppens say that this is the good time to show you solidarity. So now we think that we need effects, concrete effects. And this is why, as the CPMR Islands Commission, we suggest that the European Union should develop a specific strategy for islands. And this means a specific financial support based on NUTS 3 analysis of the COVID-19 socioeconomic impacts. And as Mr. Borges said, also a broader revision of whole state aid regulation to introduce the insularity clause. So, of course, I remain at your disposal if you have any question, and also we can discuss over the next days without problems. Thank you very much. I'm finished.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Thank you. Very, very nice presentation. Anyway, anyway all the islands of Europe, and of course, anyway, the solidarity is a very important topic. And anyway, in giving the floor to Mr. Kreml is also an important point that you said, Giuseppe. Anyway, money is important, but it's important how will be spent, and we need to have really a territorial approach. So I'd like to give the floor on this wording or to Mr. George Kremlis that I did introduce before, that will talk about insularity and circular economy in the light of COVID-19 and climate change. Mr. Kremlis, sustainability has been anyway a word that has been mentioned by many speakers before you. So anyway, so your intervention is really going to the center of the debate. Yes.
Thank you, Gianni. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to highlight the key priorities of the European Union, going from green growth to blue economy, which is extremely important for islands and for coastal areas. Then moving to circular economy, which is instrumental, a new economic model for the EU that we want to expand worldwide, and we want it to become a Mediterranean Sea basin model. And in that context, the challenges for islands in applying the circular economy, which is also vital for them, are extremely important. Then the broader picture has the Green Deal, the carbon neutrality, and of course the territorial cohesion to which Giuseppe has referred, which is also a key priority of the European Union and which is supported by the Interreg that we need to further expand and support with the view to providing more support to the islands. Now, islands have their own specificities, as we all know. In addition to the insularity handicap, they are cut, they are isolated from the single European market, and therefore they cannot benefit from the economies of scale and the other benefits of the single market. Moreover, they are more vulnerable to climate change. And I would say they are more vulnerable to pandemics, even if they are protected to some extent because they are islands, and experience shows, for example, that the Greek islands have not been affected by COVID-19. If pandemics were to appear on the islands, because the healthcare on the islands and the lack of intensive care units is there and it is visible, especially in the very small islands, this would require transport of the people to the mainland, to hospitals with helicopters or fast speed boats, a lot of complications from which the citizens of the islands would suffer. Therefore, pandemics and the islands are a dimension that need to be taken into consideration. And I really appreciated the point made by Mr. Pikula that it would be good to have a COVID-19 communication on the islands as COVID is a pandemic, but there might be in the future risks of other pandemics because of climate change and environmental degradation, and there is clearly a link between climate change, environmental degradation, and pandemics, especially with the melting of the Antarctic and the icebergs, which might lead to the appearance of new viruses and pandemics, according to some scientific opinions. Last point is, and that was made also by President Borg, that the economies of the islands rely a lot on tourism. Therefore, health and tourism are interrelated. And of course, the satellite services on the islands are satellite services around tourism. Even the agriculture supports tourism. And in that respect, this is something extremely important that we need also to look into. I'm now coming to some concrete proposals. I like the point made by President Borg that we need a permanent state aid regime for the islands, and not only a COVID or a post-COVID-19 regime, state aid regime for the islands. We need, Giuseppe has referred also to this, an insularity test in all the extended impact assessments for new legislation. The islands need to be addressed and their specificities taken into consideration with derogations and the specific financial, I would say, instruments to support the implementation of the new legislation. I would add that the Just Transition Fund, and this is something that we had the chance to discuss in the last CPMR meeting where Gianni was also present, the Just Transition Fund in Palermo could be expanded to look into the energy transition. Islands rely a lot on fossil fuels. Why not apply also part of it to the islands, and not only to focus this on the post-lignite and post-lignite move. And then last but not least, trans-European networks. There is a reference on the islands in the trans-European networks that we needed to exploit. Now, let me come to some more operational proposals, some of which have already been made. Giuseppe has referred to the need for a framework for the islands. I would say that as we have the strategy for the outermost regions, we need a strategy for the EU islands to start with, and that is very important. I would add that we also need a communication on circular economy and islands.
Mr. Kremlis,
2
sorry.
minutes.
Yes, please. Thank
Okay.
you.
I'm getting there. So we need a communication on circular economy and islands. We need also, in addition to the national strategies on circular economy, to have tailored circular economy plans for each island, because the islands are autonomous geographical entities. They need their own circular economy plan. We need climate change adaptation plans per island, and all these plans are complementary. Then I would add that we need a memorandum of understanding between the European Commission, DG Environment, and the Union for the Mediterranean Circular Economy, because we need to cover the whole Mediterranean basin. This is the cradle of our civilization, the most important sea. And then, as I have mentioned before, we need to boost Interreg, which is extremely important for all of us. I do believe that as the next programming period is still under consideration, it is very important to look into the islands issue and to have the provisions of the treaty and the declaration of the two island states, namely Malta and Cyprus, assimilating them to islands, to be fully applied and implemented. And I think now there is a clear momentum because of COVID-19, because of climate change, because of all the challenges that we are all facing, that we need to seize to develop a real policy on islands, not only the outermost regions, but also the other European islands of the European continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chemist. Thank you, and very good speech, very good proposal. Anyway, circular economy plans from the islands, and for each islands could be a very good, really needed for really.
Probably, Gianni, if with your permission, I can add something. You can see just behind me the Mediterranean Forum. Circle the Med will take place from 9 to 13 November. You and President Borg and Giuseppe Sciacca will be speakers there. It will be a broadcasted event from Greece that will cover the whole Mediterranean with a view to promoting insularity, coastal areas, and of course, circular economy and the Green Deal in the Mediterranean. So you are all most welcome to this event. And next week, on the 12th of June, we will have another event in which Gianni will be participating, which is a series of events leading to this mega virtual debate. And it is on COVID-19, our chance for cleaner energy and climate neutrality, to which all of you are also most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So as time is running, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Willy Brodus Sluiters, head of unit in the G Regio for Greece and Cyprus of the European Commission. Is going to talk about the EU programs for the recovery of the islands economy after the pandemic. And so the floor is yours, please.
Good afternoon. You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on this webinar. I'm in the lucky situation that Noordmond Swapmond has already covered to a very large extent the EU answer to the COVID crisis and its fallout. So I will try to be to go into somewhat more specifics which would concern islands. Let's start from two basics. On the one hand, the pandemic itself. It has been extremely well contained on the islands. We have had.
Mr. Sluiters,
yes.
you prefer we stay without video for the connection, maybe? Or?
Yes, that's why I prefer.
Yes.
If you,
okay.
we can try with the video if you want, huh?
We can try. Yes.
Okay, let's try with the video. If.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hold on. Yes, it's okay like that. It's okay like this?
Yes, yes, very well.
Okay,
Very well.
okay, good. Okay, so on the one hand, the first fact is that the pandemic on the islands has been extremely well contained. We have had relatively few cases, and there has been no major outbreaks, with the possible exception, I remember, of one case on the Canary Islands very early in the crisis. This is one thing. It's the positive. The other side of the medal is, of course, that the economic fallout of this crisis is likely to be very important, risks to be very important, in particular on the islands, for the reason we all know and which I've been referred to already repeatedly. Most islands are very highly dependent on tourism as their main business activity. It also goes to show that there is a certain, I would say, trade-off between the two. On the one hand, the pandemic has been extremely contained on islands because there have been very severe lockdown measures imposed very early, and that is the good side. On the other hand, of course, the more severe your lockdown measures are, the higher the impact is on your businesses. So let's see what we should do. I think the response to it has a short-term and, let's say, a medium to more long-term dimension. On the short term, it is important to relaunch the tourism sector as soon as possible. This is the main activity of most of the islands, and if we are to save something of the 2020 tourism season, it means that we have to, in conditions of safety, of course, but we have to open up in order to at least save, let's say, the months from July, August onwards, which seems to be the case. But I think we should also learn our lessons from what has happened. For one, the reason that the lockdown on the islands, and George Cunley's referred to it before, the reason that the lockdown on the islands has been so severe is that on many islands, the health system would not have been able to cope with a major outbreak. So the one lesson we have to learn is that we should make health systems on islands more resilient and more able to cope with a possible future repetition of this event. The other important lesson is, and that is not very different from what we have been advocating for a long period now, is that on the one hand, the islands economy should be much more diversified than being dependent only on tourism. We still have regions in Europe, island regions in Europe, of which the economy is 90% tourism. And within tourism itself, we should move towards a much more sustainable and more resilient forms of tourism. Let me go for a moment to the last dimension. More resilient and more sustainable. What is shown by this crisis is that certainly for some time to come, mass tourism will be severely affected. Mass tourism on a large scale, in all of its forms. Mass tourism on beaches, but also mass tourism by way of cruises. And this is something we have to reflect on. I think we would be well advised to try to move towards other models of touristic development, less mass, more quality, to put it differently, more value added per tourist on the islands. That would also make it more sustainable. It would reduce the numbers, but keep the overall income at least level, or even better. It should become also more resilient in that way, because it would solve a lot of the environmental issues to which George Cunley has already hinted to, and which
sorry, sir, just To remind
Yes.
you that you got a few minutes left, okay?
Yes, I'll stop.
Thank you.
It's okay. To which George Kremlis already hinted, and that is problems of sustainability, of waste management, of water management, of wastewater management. There's a lot of these issues which have existed for years now, and where I think this pandemic shows that they have not been tackled and that it is really urgent to tackle them now. It's another very good reason to start working on different forms of tourism, lengthening the tourism season, and doing tourism differently. And at the same time, that many of the regions currently entirely, or for the most, depend on tourism, should also try to develop different economic activities. We can contribute a lot to that with our European programs. We do. One of the earlier speakers referred to the necessity of digitalizing the islands. We have a big project currently running in Greece, which is the digital connection of the islands. And it's moving quite fast and well promising that by the end of the current programming period, we will have to cover most of the territory. And that will open up possibilities for new and different types of businesses to establish themselves on the islands. Given the time constraints, I will keep it to this, but happy to be part of the discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Reuters, for your input and the overview on what is happening also in particular in Cyprus and anyway, and in the islands from your territory. And for sure, the digitalization is progressing everywhere. And so I'd like to invite the speakers to react to the other speakers. And I would like to ask everybody in 1-2 minutes, as the time is running, anyway, fast reaction. And I would like to ask you what is the next step. Anyway, the MFF will be published. Of course, there will be some money available. And what, as Mr. Shaka said, is important how to use this money. So what your organization is going to do anyway in the coming months in order to anyway to strengthen of course to anyway bring this position of territoriality, of cohesion in the let's say in the next coming of course legislative documents that will follow the MFF in order to this money to go to the territories. So who would like to start anyway? I don't know if Mr. Poppens is still connected. Want to react to the anyway to the comments of the others, or any others would like to take the microphone and start?
Johnny, can I speak?
Please, Joseph.
Okay. For me, the most important thing for our organizations to do at the moment is to work hard so that the flexible approach being shown by the Union at the moment of this problem of this COVID-19 pandemic, so that this temporary flexible approach will become a permanent approach. We need to work very much on this because we have been hit hard by the de minimis rule. The de minimis rule has been extended up to 1 million for 3 years at the moment, and we need to make this not only a temporary for the sake of the COVID, because the islands are still at a disadvantage with the mainland. It has always been like that, and we think that we should be treated differently. Second point, which appears a lot from the comments which I am seeing, the persons who are present in this meeting, is that the island associations, the island, like Insular, the associations which are fighting for the islands, need to be empowered, and they need to be empowered by being given finance, so that we together, and that's an important point which I managed to mention at the end, we need to work together, because if we work singly, we are very small and we have got no strength. But if we are together, we are empowered, we are given strength. Okay, so that's the last point I wanted to make.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Very, very clear. We need to be more empowered. Anyway, the economy of the islands need to have more power, and that's very important. Giuseppe would like to also react.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Gianni. Concerning next steps, just to inform you that of course, the CPMR already is working on the issue of the recovery plan and the revised EU budget. Yesterday, my colleagues from the General Secretariat published 10 questions from the CPMR General Secretariat on the revised EU budget and the EU's recovery plan. So this is a first analysis from our side, dealing with 10 questions that for us are quite important. Of course, after the publication of the recovery plan and also the proposal for the revised MFF, there will be a reaction from the CPMR and of course also from the CPMR Islands Commission. For you to know, we are in contact with the different commissioners. We sent specific letters to the President of the Commission, also to key other commissioners like Ferreira, Simpson, etc. And we are very close to the European Parliament because we cooperate with SEARICA, and we have the honor to have a very good chair in SEARICA, Mrs. Meppe Pitsula, but also other MEPs that are very interested on Highlands condition, like for instance, Mr. Meppe Alfonsi, who is the Vice President for SEARICA in charge of Highlands issues. So in terms of activities, of course, the next 2 months, 3 months for us are crucial. The CPMR Islands Commission will be very active. We will send out our position on the proposal of recovery plan and also the proposal of the revised EMFF. And the idea is, of course, to make the voice of islands heard. So getting back to what all the other speakers say, we need to cooperate, etc. We are here. The CPMI Islands Commission, of course, remain at your disposal to work all together and to send out a very clear message concerning the territorialization of this recovery plan, territorialization of the EU strategies, and also the launch of a new specific strategy for islands that for us is very important.
Thank you very much. Very important update on the next steps, Giuseppe. And I see that Mr. Poppens is still connected. Mr. When you want to react, please feel free. And I don't know, George, also I saw, George Kremlis, I saw that you did book to answer to one question from Mr. Guaita on mass tourism. I don't know if you want to react and also say your point on the next steps. Anyway, circular economy plan.
Just to react very briefly on that, I think Willebrord Reuters made the point that mass tourism, low-cost flights, and all-inclusive are forms of tourism of the past. They have a very high climate and environmental footprint. We need to promote more thematic tourism, quality tourism. And there are a lot of ideas which need to be developed in this context in order to improve the quality of tourism, both for the tourists, but also for the countries hosting tourists. And we can all see that Venice, for example, that was suffering from over-tourism, became suddenly a paradigm of environmental, let's say, peace, as fish came back, noise and air pollution has disappeared, etc. Of course, this should not be the future, but over-tourism is an issue that we need also to keep in mind and not to promote, as the impacts of over-tourism are much higher than the benefits on the local economy and on the citizens. A last point that I would like to make in line with what President Borg and Giuseppe have mentioned, there is now momentum for a strategy on EU islands, for a framework, for having the next MFF, which has not been adopted, taking into consideration the islands dimension. I was always, from the past, promoting the idea of a special fund for the islands. Probably the Just Transition Fund could include some elements on that. Probably through circular economy, we should put more emphasis on islands. Probably the EIB and the EBRD could promote circular economy platforms for islands. There are a lot of ideas. We need to seize the momentum and to promote all that. And I do believe that in addition to all the stakeholders, as President Borg has said, that need to join forces to promote this idea, I refer to CPMR, to insular, to greening the islands, to the Mediterranean Forum, Circle of the Med. We need also to build alliances among the two island states and also all the other states that have islands. We are millions of inhabitants on the islands, a big size member state, I would say. We need to have a voice in order to be able to shape a future for the islands that will be circular, in line with the Green Deal and with energy transition.
Yes, thank you, George. I don't know if others don't want to, or panelists don't want to react. We can try in the few minutes left to reply to some other questions. Like there is a very nice question from Jace Elsmore. Are there any thoughts from the esteemed panel about the cooperation with the UK islands after Brexit? I don't know who would like to answer to this question, or we can, anyway, of course, is a right, proper question. And then there is another question: how do you foresee the digital transformation taking place on the islands? And yes, there are other questions as well that you can see in the Q&A.
Gianni, can I say something on the digital transformation? Willebord Sleuters has referred to Greece and to the possibility to promote a digital economy on the Greek islands. It is true that digital economy complements circular economy together with artificial intelligence. And we need to promote the idea in the trans-European networks, which are also telecommunication networks in addition to transport and energy networks, to promote digital economy on the islands. Because if we provide services, for example, for telehealth and all the other means to provide basic services to the citizens of the islands through the digital economy, we will be able to solve a lot of problems that currently the islands have, and of course use artificial intelligence, and all these expenses are eligible under the EU funds and special programs that we need to boost further.
Yes, thank you very much. And George, anyways, what's your point of view on the UK islands after Brexit? Anyway, it could be any link or continual cooperation with
I think you are the right person to reply to this, Gianni, because your network is the worldwide network. I mean,
yes,
the UK islands are not anymore EU islands. I regret this. Of course, we will have cooperation with the UK, and we need to build islands networks, but you have the islands network par excellence, and in that context, I think the UK islands will have a voice through greening the islands.
Yes, thank you very much, George.
Maybe I can say something on this. I think that, of course, it depends on what it means with the cooperation. I mean, there will be always a sort of cooperation among islands and the region in the area, because this is quite normal. UK is leaving the EU, but it is not leaving Europe. This is something of different. In terms of participation in the EU programs, etc., this is another story, and I think that we need to wait for the final result of the negotiation among the UK government and, of course, the EU, to understand what will be the status of UK islands and regions within the different cooperation programs or research program, etc., etc.
Thank you very much, Giuseppe. And as the time is gone on now,
just a second.
Joseph, yes, please.
Just a little note. If you remember well, our Insular Forum last October in Gozo, you were present, published a common strategy for European islands on digitalization. We will put a link in the notes here so that one can see this document. It is core statement of conclusions and intent of developing a common digitization strategy on EU islands, for EU islands, okay? So we'll put a note so that this document can be accessed by the participants of this.
Yes. In fact, all the presentations will be in our website in one page dedicated. All the proceedings, also the speech from Mr. Piccola, and we will answer also in a second step to the questions we couldn't answer now in this webinar. I'd like to recall that we will have a focus on tourism on the 5th of June in a global webinar. With a very high level, of course, speakers as well as today. And then we will have, our plan is to have a lot of technical webinars in order to tip in the different technology solutions and economics behind, in order to support the recovery plans of the islands during this year after COVID. So this I'd like to highlight. So I thank you a lot, all the speakers, all the attendees, of course the Insulaire for the support, CPM Islands Commission, and also now join with us, as I said before, I've seen the ICT Technology Institute of Canary Islands and others, the Global Island Partnership, and many other organizations are joining this digital initiative of 2020, and so we will go through all these webinars until a digital event, a virtual event that is planned for November, and details will be given very shortly. And so continue to follow us, and of course to raise any questions, suggestions of in a way that this digital anyway initiative can be as much as possible useful for anyway a green restart in of the islands. Islands can, as we said in our slogan, islands can lead the green way. So thank you very much to all speakers, and
thank you.
So I hope, and I'd like to recall that the survey is still open in our website for answers, and next appointment will be on the 5th of June with the tourism webinar. Thank you very much all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.